Heading into this weekend, there were a lot of unanswered questions about a lot of teams. We now have answers about quite a few of them. So, how does that impact the landscape of college football? And is there a new number one? Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to be breaking down the AP Top 25 as well as giving you my own version of the Top 25. But before we start off with the AP Top 25 here, I am going to go ahead and ask you to like, comment, and subscribe if you end up liking the video. It really helps out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about the AP Top 25. Unranked teams, or the teams that received the most votes and didn't get ranked, were Kansas State, Kentucky, and Colorado. Working backwards, at 25 they have Fresno State, 24 they have Kansas, 23 they have Missouri, 22 they have Florida, 21 they have Tennessee, 20 they have Ole Miss ranked for some reason, at 19 they have Oregon State, at 18 they have Miami, at 17 they have Duke, at 16 they have Washington State, at 15 they have North Carolina, 14 Oklahoma, 13 LSU, 12 Alabama, 11 Notre Dame, and then entering the top 10, at 10 we have Utah, at 9 we have Oregon, at 8 they have USC, at 7 they have Washington, at 6 they have Penn State, at 5 they have Florida State, at 4 they have Ohio State, at 3 they have Texas, and the top 2 remains unchanged since the beginning of the year. Number 2 Michigan, and number 1 Georgia. All in all, it's pretty okay. Like, I'm glad they finally have Washington ahead of USC. I'm glad that Oregon appears to be getting some real respect on the national stage now. Alabama, they might be the 12th best team in the country. I think they're a little low on LSU. I think they're a little low on North Carolina, but it's not that big of a deal. I think the biggest problem that I have with this ranking, the actual AP Top 25, is Ole Miss being ranked still. They have done nothing to prove that they are a top 25 team in the country. And this is one of the major faults of the AP Top 25. It's kind of biased towards the beginning of the year. And Ole Miss hasn't really beaten anybody, and they didn't particularly play well against Alabama, who also really hasn't beaten anybody. So I don't think Ole Miss should be ranked. As far as my list from last week to this week goes, there were 4 teams that I had ranked last week that are no longer ranked in this video. And that's UCLA, who I had at 24, Colorado, who I had at 18, Iowa, who I had at 21, and Arkansas, who I had at 25. I will say this, I did not have Ole Miss ranked last week, so it's not like they fell down in the poll, and then I was bitching about that for no reason because I did the same thing. I didn't have Ole Miss ranked last week. I didn't think they're a good team, and I still don't think they're a good team. I think they're probably going 6-6 or 7-5. Arkansas, on the other hand, I do actually think is a good team. Not so much Iowa. I think they kind of got exposed this past week. I thought the defense was going to be maybe better than what they were, or at least the way that they looked versus Penn State. Colorado, I did not see any scenario where they only scored like 7 or 10 points. I don't remember how much they ended up scoring in that game. I did not see that coming. I didn't think Oregon's defense had that in them. Turns out they do. I kind of thought that, Oregon would win because there was no scenario where Colorado's defense was going to stop them. So I kind of thought that they'd win like 45-31 or something like that. I thought it'd be a pretty high-scoring shootout sort of game, and I was right offensively, at least, the matchup of Oregon's offense versus Colorado's defense. But I did not think Oregon's defense was that good. So they are much better, I think, than I anticipated them being after the first few weeks of the season. UCLA, they lost a slugfest. I would have liked to have seen, offensively them be able to get something going. Dante Moore looked like a freshman. I've kind of felt for a while that UCLA was actually a team for next year rather than this year so much, and that's really because of Dante Moore. He's looked really good at times, and he's looked like a freshman starting quarterback at other times. I still think Chip Kelly has built himself a program there. I still think they're probably maybe 7 or 8 wins this year, but I think they're clearly a step down from, that like top 4 Pac-12 teams right now in Washington, Oregon, USC, and Utah. I think they're clearly a step down from them. Moving on to 25 through 21, these are teams that I think are probably at some point, probably they're going to bounce in and out, but I really like these teams. I think Louisville at 25 is a solid team. I think Fromm, their head coach, is a really good football coach, and I think he's going to be able to get Louisville to be a consistent football program. Kansas at 24, I think they play Texas here in either this week or the week after. So they're probably going to fall out after that game. I don't particularly think they're going to pull off the upset. Not impossible. Jalen Daniels is an incredible football player. I really like him. I think the offense is actually good enough to score against a team like Texas this year as opposed to last year. And I think that they could end up getting 7 or 8 wins. Kentucky, I think, is going to run into the buzzsaw here in the upcoming weeks, and I think they're probably going to take a step back a little bit. Missouri, I'm a bit more confident in than Kentucky in terms of picking up some wins in the SEC this year. I just don't think Devin Leary is a very good quarterback, and I really like Missouri's offense. Oregon State, they lost a close one to Washington State. It wasn't really that close, though. It wasn't a 3-point game. Washington had like a double-digit lead for the vast majority of that game. Oregon State scored late to make it look better on paper. But I still think they're a high-quality football team. I think if they were in a different division, maybe if they were in the Big 12 or the Big 10, I think they would have a much better chance of getting to like 9-10 wins. Unfortunately, they're in the Pac-12 this year, and I think they're probably going to end up with like 7 or 8 again. Moving on to 20 through 16 here. At 20, I had Tennessee, that is up 2 spots from last week. At 19, I have Florida up 4 spots from last week. At 18, we have the U, Miami, Florida, up 2 spots from last week. At 17, I have Duke treading water. And at 16, I have Notre Dame falling down 7 spots from where I had them ranked last week. Let's jump back here to the top of this list. Tennessee, I'm not sure is a real football team. I think there's a very real possibility that they don't have a whole lot of talent at the wide receiver position and they can't run the ball for shit, and their defense is average at best. I think there's a very real possibility that Joe Milton is actually a good quarterback, but not a transcendent talent, so he can't really rise above the limitations of the players around him, or at least he can't yet. I still think he's probably going to get drafted fairly high. Not sure in the first round. I haven't really watched him on tape this year, but I have seen like a few plays here or there just flipping through the channels. And he's been okay. He hasn't really impressed me. And hearing from other people, that's sort of the same sort of position. Like, he's been good. He has been bad, but he hasn't really been elite either. Like, he's, I think, clearly a step back from Hendon Hooker. And the offensive system, I think, is still pretty good. I think Josh Heupel is a really good offensive play caller and everything, but I just think Tennessee is not the level of program where you're going to be able to consistently pull out 10 wins in the SEC. Florida, I'm not sure is a real football team either. They reek of fake. Graham Mertz is not a good quarterback. I think the offense is good. I think you showed up for a rivalry game. I don't particularly think this is a sustainable thing. I think you are closer to what you showed against Utah than what you showed against Tennessee. Miami of Florida, on the other hand, I think could be a team that pulls off an upset or two and ends up with like 10 wins this year. I think the ACC is much better than it has been in the past, and I think Mario Cristobal is getting Miami rolling, and I believe in their future with Tyler Van Dyke. I think he is an NFL caliber quarterback. Probably shouldn't come out this year because he'll be a mid-round pick, but I still think he's very, very talented and could end up being a first-round pick in later draft classes. Kind of the exact same situation with Duke. Less confident in their future than I am with Miami, but right now this year they play defense. They have an NFL caliber quarterback in Riley Leonard, and they beat Clemson pretty soundly. I think that this is a sneaky team in the ACC. I think there's a very real possibility that Duke is the second best team in the ACC behind Florida State. And Notre Dame at 16, I was phenomenally disappointed by their effort against Ohio State. Ohio State came out and basically did exactly what I thought they were going to do offensively and defensively, but Notre Dame, I don't understand what they were doing the vast majority of that game. There were a couple of fourth and third and shorts where they just didn't get it for some reason. Like, I don't think Austin Estime got the ball on any one of those short yardage situations. And, like, what's the point of having a 6'1", 240-pound running back if you're not going to give him the ball on third or fourth and one? I don't understand it. I don't understand their game plan. I think the offensive line played really, really, really well, but Sam Hartman can't win big games. I talked about that in the preview, and when it came down to it, he couldn't win big games. And I don't particularly blame the defense for anything on that last drive, because it's exactly what I would have done on all of those plays, pretty much. Now, the last two plays of the game where there were only 10 people on the field, yeah, that's rough, and that's not a good look for Marcus Williams. But I'm not really a believer in Marcus Williams to begin with. This game pretty much was going to decide if I was going to be wrong about that or if I was going to be right about that. And right now it's leaning towards I was kind of right about Marcus Williams not being the guy for Notre Dame going forward. Moving on to 15 through 11 here. At 15, I have Washington State up 4 spots from last week. At 14, I have Utah up 2 spots. At 13, I have Alabama up 1 spot. At 12, I have Oklahoma up 1 spot. And 11, I have North Carolina up 1 spot. Washington State, I think, is probably the 5th best team in the Pac-12 right now. I do think there is kind of a difference in a level of athlete and level of coaching between them and the top 4, Utah, USC, Oregon, Washington, but they could definitely pull off an upset in any of the games if they end up playing them. Cameron Ward is an unbelievable quarterback talent who is not getting talked about as much as he should. I think he's likely to return for a senior season and then head out in the draft. But right now, of the guys that I think are going to be in that 2025 NFL draft class, he's probably QB3 heading into that season, and I think has the potential to be a top 10 pick in that draft. The only 2 quarterbacks that I would have ahead of him, just based off of what I've seen out of them so far this year, and if I believe they're going to come back next year, would be Shader Sanders, who I believe is absolutely going to come back, and Drew Allar, who can't go out this year, but I think is probably going to go out as a junior. Utah has been playing really, really consistently and really, really efficiently on offense the entire year. I highly doubt that they have that next gear that they can get to without Cam Rising. So I think it's pretty important that he comes back. But right now, that team is the best defense in the Pac-12 and one of the best defenses in the country, with a really good running game and a quarterback that doesn't particularly make a whole lot of mistakes. That is a dangerous team, especially against a team like USC or potentially Washington that can't really play defense. Like, we know USC can't play defense. I don't know if Washington can't play defense or not, because Washington has just been scoring so often and so much on offense that it really puts their defense at a disadvantage, because their defense is playing way more snaps and way more possessions than the average defense. And that's true to an extent with USC, but we have like 7 years of track record with Lincoln Riley teams that they can't play defense at all at any level. Like, they can't even put out a competent defense, let alone like a good one. So I'm more confident in Washington's ability to play defense than I am USC's. Alabama at 13, they beat a Ole Miss team pretty handedly. Like, 2 touchdowns for this Alabama's team is a solid win. I don't think Ole Miss is very good. So I'm not really going to jump them up as high as perhaps a top 15 win in the AP poll might suggest that they should jump up. I've got Oklahoma at 12. I was not a believer in this team at all heading into the season. I'm still not really, but the fact remains that Cincinnati is a well-coached football team that had a lot of guys that really should not have been playing at the group of 5 level. And now that they're in the Big 12, they're not playing at the group of 5 level anymore, but they're still competing at a high level against what has been a pretty good offense so far this season, and they held them to 20 points. So yeah, I think the defense might be better than I was expecting them to be. I don't like Brett Venables as a head coach, just if I'm being honest with you. I think he was a really good defensive coordinator that had a ton of talent at Clemson. And I think now that he doesn't have that same level of talent at Oklahoma, I think he's kind of struggling a little bit. But the defense has looked really good so far this year. I want to see them against, an actual offense first, which is not something they've played this year, before I could really say that that's like, oh, that's a top 10 defense, like all the statistics shows them being. I've got North Carolina at 11, and I am much higher on North Carolina than I think maybe anybody in the entire country. I think there is a bigger chance that they end up 12-0 and playing Florida State, who is 12-0 in the ACC championship game, than there is a chance that those two teams don't end up 12-0 and playing each other in the ACC championship game. I think North Carolina has got the defensive side of the ball figured out a little bit. I think they've put together a competent defense that can rush the passer. I don't think it's a good defense, mind you, but I think it's competent. And I think that they play a couple of tough teams. They do play Clemson. They play North Carolina State, who's always tough. That's a rivalry game. They play Duke. That's also a rivalry game. But I think Drake May is better than all of those defenses, and I think he is going to be able to propel them past all of those opponents. They might slip up one game, go 11-1. Either way, I think the two heavy favorites for the ACC championship game should be Florida State and North Carolina. Now we're going to slow down a little bit and talk about number 10, USC. I mean, listen, Caleb Williams is awesome, okay? But I have serious question marks about how they can match up against other teams, even just in the Pac-12, let alone on the national scale. I think if they played Michigan or Penn State or Ohio State, they would lose by 40. I do not think this is a national championship contender. I think that the defense is genuinely bad, and I think they're probably going to end up losing 2 or 3 games in the regular season. I don't think they can beat Oregon. I don't think they can beat Notre Dame still, just because that's a bad matchup. I think Notre Dame's going to run all over that defense, and I think Notre Dame is going to at least make it difficult on offense for them. But they could absolutely beat Notre Dame, and they could absolutely beat Oregon as well. They could absolutely beat Washington, who I didn't have listed on those teams just because I'm not sure if Washington can play defense at either. Now, I know Washington is going to score pretty much every time they get the ball against USC, but I'm also pretty sure USC is going to score every time they get the ball against Washington. So as far as matchups and stuff like that goes, I think they very well could end up losing to Utah. I think they could very well end up losing to UCLA, who plays fantastic defense, and if they can get the run game figured out, then they might be able to win the game. Dante Moore, by that point in the season, really should have everything under his belt. Like, he kind of should be more comfortable. Maybe he can show out. I don't know. I just do not buy into this team really at any level, other than Caleb Williams is the best quarterback I've ever seen. But even then, I don't think his receivers are great. I think they're good. I don't think they're great. I don't think they have a dominant receiver. And I don't think they can run the ball. And the offensive line appears to be average to me. So I don't buy into this team. I think if they were still doing everything that they were doing, but they didn't have Caleb Williams as their quarterback, if they just had somebody else who didn't win the Heisman Trophy last year, then I think they would not be ranked in the top 10. At the AP poll. I don't even think they'd be ranked in the top 15. I think they'd be like 17 or 18, right where Washington State is. I just do not buy into this team at all. At number 9, I have LSU. This is a team that I was very, very high on heading into the season, and I am still high on right now. I think they are the best team in the SEC West, and I think that they are probably the second best team in the SEC. I do think Georgia is probably better than them, but that is something that I think is going to get answered by the end of the season. I think LSU is elite on offense. Jalen Daniels is absolutely fantastic. Malik Neighbors is a first-round talent at wide receiver, and they've got good talent all around. I think the defense is a problem. I think they're probably a below average to bad defense. I think the secondary in particular is lacking in talent. And the fact of the matter is that Harold Perkins is a really, really good pass rusher, but he's also like 6 foot and 235 pounds. So he's not somebody that you can put on the line really consistently throughout the whole game. So the fact that they had him playing off ball on first and second down against Florida State is something that I think is probably going to end up having to be the norm for Harold Perkins. But I still believe in this team. I think they are 1 or 2 upsets away, depending upon your opinion on Alabama. I don't think LSU winning in Alabama would be an upset. I think they're a better team than Alabama. So, that's just my opinion. But I think they're 1 or 2 upsets away from making the playoff. I think they're pretty clearly the best team in the SEC West. I don't believe in Alabama at all offensively, and I think the defense has some problems that LSU is going to be able to take advantage of. At number 8, I've got Oregon, who just beat the brakes off of Colorado, and they really, really impressed me this past weekend. I think they looked like a national championship contender this week. Bo Nix is playing like an elite level quarterback. He probably should be in the Heisman conversation. I think we're going to have to wait until he plays either Washington or USC for that to happen, for him to really be elevated into that conversation. But he's still playing at a really, really good level. I think their wide receiver core is underrated. I think that they've got some really, really nice talents out there, and I think Bucky Irving is incredible. I also believe that the offensive line has been much better than I think really anybody could have seen coming. I think that they've been one of the 10 best offensive lines in college football this year, and the defense has been really, really, really good, which again is not something I particularly believed they were going to be this year. I thought that they would be, maybe good, not great, but they've been great so far this season, and I think they are right now, I believe them to be the second best team in the Pac-12. At number 7, I have Penn State. And if I'm being entirely honest with you, they should probably be ranked 5. But I just like the teams that are ahead of them a little bit more right now. Penn State has what is looking week after week like a much better win against Virginia, West Virginia, that is, than I think anybody really expected that to be heading into the season. But West Virginia's 3-1. And they looked pretty good going 3-1 too. So that's a better team than I think people are going to give Penn State credit for, and especially the way that game looked. Like Penn State was dominant in that game. And this past week, they destroyed a ranked Iowa team that many people thought, not me, but many people thought was the 4th best team in the Big Ten. So that's a big win, too. I think both of those wins are bigger and better wins than either the team that I have ranked 6 or the team that I have ranked 5. But I just think the teams that I have ranked ahead of them are better in the long run. Now, they are going to play one of those teams in October, so we'll find out if they're better than them or not. But I think there's a very, very real possibility that Penn State is the best team in the country. I really, really do. They have looked the part throughout the early part of the season. They have not really had a close game. They have had like a quote-unquote bad game 2 weeks ago, but that's not really a bad game. And Drew Allar so far this season has been the best quarterback in the Big Ten. I think they might have the best offensive line in the Big Ten. It's probably between them and Michigan to go along with, barring none, the best defense in the Big Ten and maybe the best defense in the country. They have multiple high level players at every level of that defense. Chop Robinson might be the best pass rusher in the country. Abdul Carter at the second level of the linebacking core is one of probably the 5 or 6 best linebackers in the country. Kalen King is unbelievable to go along with consistently outstanding safety play that they've had in the past 5-6 years, and several young defensive backs waiting in the wing to break out, in my opinion. This is a very, very, very complete and a very, very, very well-rounded team that honestly might end up winning the Big Ten. I think they have a real chance of winning the Big Ten. And this one is going to ruffle some feathers, but I have Michigan at number 6. I think Michigan is a dominant run defense that has some serious pass rush concerns, in my opinion. And I think the run offense is ready to pop and end up being as good as it has been the past 2 years once they get into Big Ten play and potentially start to realize that even though JJ has gotten better, he is still not that level of quarterback that can carry an offense. So I think they're going to end up running the ball more as the season goes on. And if JJ needs to, he's very capable of making a play or two here or there, but I do not think that he is a level of quarterback that is capable of carrying an offense through the passing attack. I think the run offense has to carry the offense in general. I think the offensive line is probably the worst one that you've had out of the past, this year and the past 2 seasons. I think this one's probably the worst of those 3. I still think this is probably a top 10, top 15 offensive line in the country, but they have some problems that older offensive lines from the past 2 years just didn't have at any point in the season. Like last year's offensive line, because of the turnover, they really had a couple of different times where communication was a problem and stuff like that, but there was never a doubt that they were going to figure it out. And I'm not sure that this team's offensive line is really going to figure it out and hit that elite level. But the biggest reason that I have you falling 4 spots from number 2 last week to number 6 this week is after 4 weeks, we ought to know what your team is. So if you still haven't proven jack shit, then I'm not going to put you in the top 5. And you haven't played anybody, and it's not just that you haven't played anybody. You've played bad teams. ECU, I don't think, has won a football game. Bowling Green is awful. UNLV is awful. Rutgers is actually okay, but that is not a team that has Power 5 levels of talent. And you're not playing anybody either, really. You got Nebraska this week, which is not a team that has Power 5 levels of talent. And after that, you're playing Minnesota, who, even though I thought they had a good defense for most of the year, maybe they don't actually, because if Northwestern is going to come back from 20 points down in the fourth quarter, then you don't have a good defense. And the offense is extraordinarily inept. And so Minnesota isn't really that good of a team either, and you don't really play anybody until you play Penn State. And then after Penn State, you play Maryland, who I think is actually a good team that could potentially push you a little bit. And then last game of the season, obviously, you play Ohio State, which is going to be a big deal. But if there's one thing with this team that I am confident in, is that we have not seen them try 100%. Like, we have not really seen them get up to play a football game yet. So we have not seen this team at its peak. And I think there's a real possibility that we've seen this team at its absolute floor against Bowling Green. And it's just that Bowling Green was so awful that you still ended up winning the game 31-6. So we might have seen the floor for this team, but we have not seen the ceiling for this team. We have not seen them go all out against an opponent this year. And that is a good thing, I guess, if you want to say that. Because I do think that they have a different level that they can turn on and get to, but they just haven't been impressive in any of the games that they've played. Like, if Washington played Bowling Green, even if Michael Penix threw 3 interceptions, they still win that game 56-10. Like, so the offense has been middle of the pack, really, in the whole country, and that is very concerning. And I think that stems largely from the lack of talent at the wide receiver position. And I like Cornelius Johnson. I think he's a late round pick. I like Roman Wilson. I think he's a late round pick. You have nobody else on offense. I think if you get lucky and JJ McCarthy returns for a senior season, kind of looking at the quarterback class this year and realizing he's not going to go in the first round, comes back for another year, I think you need to hit the portal hard for wide receivers and receiving talent. I've got Washington at number 5. The fact of the matter is that I think this is the best team in the Pac-12. I think if they can get past Oregon and USC, I think they're going to cruise control into the playoffs. I do think the Pac-12 has the no divisions rule. I think they have the best 2 teams just play each other at the end of the year again, which right now, if I had to guess, I would say it would probably be Washington and Oregon playing again. But it's whatever, I guess. It's not that important. I think they have maybe the best wide receiver core in all of college football. I think they have multiple first-round picks there and multiple first-round picks waiting in the wings at wide receiver. I think they have a ridiculous amount of depth at the wide receiver position. An offensive line that has been outstanding, really in the pass blocking game, not so much in the run blocking game. They've kind of just been average, but they've been really, really good in the passing game. The question is, can the defense come up with a stop or 2 against an elite level offense? Because nobody is stopping this offense, particularly in the matchup with USC. The question is going to be, can the defense come out and get a stop or maybe 2 stops? Can they get a turnover or a sack on 3rd down to end the game, or end the drive rather? And they do have some talent, some high-level NFL talent on that defense, which is not something I can say about USC. So I think they do have a little bit more upside on their defense than USC, and because of that, I think that they're just a better team than USC. That being said, Oregon, I think, is going to be a tough matchup for them. That's going to be an absolute slugfest when they play this year. At number 4, I have Ohio State right now. The win over Notre Dame was massive. I think that's a good football team, but the offense left a lot out on the field, in my opinion. Now, I think the offense is probably going to get better. The most important thing, though, was that the offensive line held up, and that was not something I anticipated happening. Now, it could just be that Notre Dame's defensive line isn't very good. I thought that they were kind of average or maybe just above average, but they might be bad. Either way, you still beat what I had ranked as a top 10 team last week, so that's a very, very, very big win. Now, the question was, can the defense hold up? That was the other question that I had, and I do think Notre Dame is a very well-balanced offense, but Sam Hartman just can't win big games and just can't play well in big games. So I think I still have a little bit of a concern, but it turns out the defense is probably actually just really, 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 really good. I think the secondary in particular has been much better than I was last year, and I think there's a very real possibility this is the best team in the country. The offense, I think, has to get a little bit more explosive, especially against these good defenses. Like, I don't think Notre Dame is anywhere close to the best defense that you're going to play this year. I think Michigan's defense and Penn State's defense are just in different categories than Notre Dame's defense, and the offense did not look great. So I think you need to get better, and more importantly, I think you need to give Mayan Williams the football more, because Mayan Williams is the kind of running back that pretty much nothing is going to stop him from getting 5 yards every play behind a solid offensive line, which is what you have. There were a couple times with Chip Trayanum and Travion Henderson where they weren't really getting yards, and I felt like they were kind of hesitating behind the line, where Mayan Williams just would have ran straight through it and gotten 2 or 3 yards when they got nothing. So I really think you need to play Mayan Williams more. At number 3, I have Texas, and they looked really, really good against Baylor this past week, which isn't something I particularly saw coming, but they looked really good against Baylor. They have the win, maybe the best win in the entire country against Alabama. The defense has a ridiculous amount of depth along the defensive line. Like, their backup defensive linemen, I think, start on all but maybe 4 or 5 teams in the entire country. That's the kind of depth that we're talking about here with this defensive line. They've got a really, really solid and good group of skill position players on offense with A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Sanders, the tight end. I think the offensive line has been much better than I anticipated it being. I think Quinn Ewers has been okay. He's kind of done what I've expected him to do so far this year. And the running game has looked much better than it did early on in the season these past 2 weeks. This is a real football team that I think only has one game remaining on their schedule, and that's versus Oklahoma. So if you beat Oklahoma, I think you're in the Big 12 championship game, where you're probably going to play Oklahoma again. And, you never really like to play the same team twice, but I think you're pretty clearly better than Oklahoma, and I think you're pretty clearly better than everybody in the Big 12. So I think this is a relatively safe bet to go 13-0 and make the playoffs. At number 2, I have Florida State. They have a dominating win against a top 10 opponent in LSU, who I have A, currently ranked in the top 10, and B, were ranked at the top 10 heading into the season. Right now, they have the second best win of any team in the country against Clemson. I still think Clemson is a good football team. I think they're very likely to end up like 9-3, maybe 10-2. They do play North Carolina, but I think that's probably the only game in doubt for them on the rest of their schedule, in my opinion. So I think Clemson is still a very solid team and I think they have a stud group of offensive weapons. Specifically, Keon Coleman is absolutely unbelievable. A really good quarterback and a defense with not a lot of depth, but their starters have very high-end potential. And at number 1, I have Georgia. I still think they're probably the best team in the country, but I know what you're thinking. And you're thinking, Nathan, you just went on a goddamn tirade about Michigan at 6. And how about how they haven't played anybody? How the fuck is Georgia at number 1 when they haven't played anybody? Well, 2 things. First thing, if you took the best players from all 4 of the teams that Michigan has played and put them onto one team, they would still not be as good as South Carolina. And Georgia dominated that game. Doesn't necessarily look like it in the scoreboard, but that's because of some questionable offensive game planning and play calling. But if they had stuck to the run, then they would have probably, I think, beaten South Carolina like 45-17. And in the games where they weren't playing South Carolina, they won by wider margins than any game that Michigan has played. Specifically this past week, where it kind of looks like Carson Beck finally got comfortable with the offense and finally looked good throwing the football. And they're putting up 50 points on teams, and Michigan isn't. And I don't want to hear jack shit about Michigan's offense and about how they're not built to put up that many points. Georgia runs the same goddamn offense that you do. They are a power run-first offense where the quarterback is expected to do little more than be a game manager and occasionally hit a deep throw. That's what Michigan's offense is. That's what Georgia's offense is. And Georgia is scoring more points against better teams. That is why they are still ranked number 1 and probably will be ranked number 1 throughout the entire season. Mainly because they're the best team in the country right now. But that's just me. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagreed with me at any point, go ahead and leave a comment down in the comment section below. Let's just keep it civil, because after all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole, and I'll see you next time.